60 Minutes with Angela starts right now.
Now, my host today says, quote, even if we block all avenues of waste, bring corruption to the barest minimum, there is little indication that what would be available would still suffice to go round, let alone service the needs of the bureaucracy or fund the yawning infrastructure gap. End of quote. Hello and welcome. This is 60 Minutes with me, Angela Ajitumobi. Thank you for joining me on the program today. My host today is one of my favorite columnists to read on the economy and business in Nigeria. He's a member of the editorial board of the Nation newspaper and a must-read columnist. His column appears in the Nation newspaper every Tuesday. He's had calls to call out Nigeria's new president, Muhammadu Buhari, on a lot of policy issues. He's thrown shade at the president, especially his understanding and judgment of the complexities of the current time. In the coming months, he asks, are we to expect an economy in which the state remains the dominant player as the president's instincts will prefer, or one which the private sector is given the muscle to do what it does best, while the state strengthens its regulations? So, join me after the break as I count down 60 minutes with Sanya Oni, an editor with Nigeria's Nation newspaper. Welcome back. Welcome, Mr. Oni. Thank you very much for coming back on the program with me.
Thank you.
Okay, so in my introduction, I talked about you saying that even if we blocked all the avenues of waste, bring corruption to the barest minimum, there is little indication that what would be available would still suffice to go round, let alone service the needs of bureaucracy or fund the yawning infrastructure gap. In other words, all the steps this administration of President Buhari is taking is still not enough, except what happens.
Now, the primary point I sought to make there, and that's not to underestimate what this administration has done. Clearly, there's so much rot in the system.
Yes.
So much waste, so many leakages in the system that needs to be addressed urgently. And so to that extent, I will agree that this administration has done a lot of work in terms of trying to restructure the structure of government.
Yes.
And to ensure that those avenues that either existed as drain pipes to national treasury, they are blocked.
Yes.
I think they're very important. But at the same time, I'm under no illusions that blocking leakages, cleaning the system,
yes,
they are nearly enough. The reason is simple. Year in, year out, we turn out university graduates, polytechnic graduates. At the lower levels, we turn out secondary school graduates. Many of them, in fact, this year alone, we learned that 1.7 million school leavers left secondary school who are expected to find spaces in our tertiary educational institutions. Unfortunately, the space available is just 520,000. So that tells you
1.2.
that 1.2 will be out. Now, we need resources to expand the capacity of our institutions to take on these people. We need to create institutions to absorb them, skill institutes and things like that, stuff like that.
Yes.
And so that's one level. If you look at the level of the infrastructure, today, Nigeria is barely generating 5,000, 6,000 megawatts of electricity. In a country that effective demand is put at some 100,000 megawatts, and then you ask yourself, how many years we need to bridge this gap? It's a huge gap.
It is.
That exists. Obviously, we already agree that, yes, there is a limit to what government can do. But you see, government still has to lead. In an economy like ours, where government is actually the chief promoter of things,
Yes.
government still has to lead. And so when you see all this activism put together, yes, as important as they are,
Yes.
I say they are not nearly enough. What we need is to expand the economy, to get the economy moving. And the current growth rate I must say that.
Yes.
I understand the growth is about 2% now. A few years back, we were doing about 7%.
Even at that, 2 now.
Even at, yes, because of the slowdown in the economy.
Yes.
And so you ask yourself, even at 7, if we couldn't cope when we're doing 7%, how can we possibly think of coping even now that things have slowed down? So that's the point I try to make in that.
So, I mean, you've mentioned the slump now. I was reading the former CBN governor the other day, Sanusi Lamido, and his call for devaluation of the naira. He says it's time to do it. We should stop pretending that everything is right. Do you support a call for the devaluation of the naira?
With due respect to his evidence, the Emir of Kano, I think this point I have tried to make in different fora.
Yes.
That when a country like Nigeria that has a single source of foreign exchange, as we have, which is oil,
Yes.
what exactly will be the benefit of devaluation? In the first place, the idea of devaluation is to encourage exports. That's the primary driver of devaluation as a policy, to encourage your own domestic products
Going out.
to go out. A country like Nigeria that produces next to nothing, what are you going to export? The sole export commodity is oil. That oil is already set by quota, OPEC quota. In other words, you can't even go beyond your quota. That's one. Two, what exactly will be the determinant? At what point do you determine the value of the naira? In an environment where demand for forex keeps rising and the supply is so limited. In fact, the supply is actually shrinking.
Now.
In other words, you will continue to allow the naira to find its value, which means that value is not something you can even predict. And so when I listen to such arguments, I ask myself, what exactly do people have in mind when they say naira should be allowed to find its value? There's no
What
country.
about agricultural exports? If you say we don't have exports, the only export we have is oil. We still hear about exports of cocoa and cashew. You know, we see these things. They said, you know, agricultural exports are happening.
Let me address that very directly.
Yes.
Is it not amazing that 50-something years after independence, we are still exploiting primary products with little or no local value added? And if you look at the price of these commodities in the global market, they are so small. The price
Cheap.
Very cheap. Is that what Nigeria, an economy like Nigeria, wants to, that we expect to drive Nigeria's economy?
I want you to explain.
Without substantial local value added.
Yes.
I'm talking of local value addition in terms of conversion of these things.
Precisely. And I want you to explain that further, because you said primary product without local value added. So give us an example. Are you talking about exporting the cocoa itself or converting cocoa to chocolate? Is that what you're talking about?
I'll give an example. A typical example is cassava. Currently, there's so much craze to export cassava. Now, cassava, what are the derivatives of cassava? The derivatives: starch, glue, and so many other things that you can produce from them. Nigeria now puts these things together and export them. And then this thing gets abroad. All those derivatives are produced and sent to us. We pay higher premium for them. Whereas
we should be converting the cassava to glue.
That is the thing. And that's what we are not doing presently because we lack the capacity. Either the technical capacity, the technology is simply not there. Yes. So I would expect the government, first and foremost, to invest in the area of infrastructure. Of course, you can't talk of any development, any medium scale industry without power.
Yes.
And then you encourage micro industries to be able to take advantage of these things. It's when values are added that we can begin to now have real value for our commodities, not the present export of raw processed materials.
Yes. I mean, they do say that small businesses are the soul of any economy. You've talked now about investing in micro businesses because those are the businesses that are at the bottom, and until those ones are stronger. Is there anything telling you that may be the policy direction of this administration?
Honestly, I was excited a few days ago when I heard the Vice President talk about helping the small and medium scale. I think he used one analogy that I found very interesting. He said the federal government of Nigeria bailed out the banks. Now, those are big businesses.
Yes.
Spent 600 billion
Yes.
to bail out the banks. And he said something that there will be nothing wrong in spending as much as that to bail out the small and the middle scale industries. Because these are the key drivers of the economy. So I want to believe from that comment, I want to believe that the federal government is beginning to think in the direction of actually pumping more money into that sector, and to be a welcome development if it happens.
What about diversification of the economy? Everyone talks about how, in fact, oil may dry up soon, but we still seem, as you've called it, I want to get the words you used right, distributive federalism with its premium on sharing.
Yeah.
That's the way you put it. And my question is, who will change a formula everyone has been benefiting from? Even if they all criticize this formula before they go in, this idea that it's only oil we're all sharing, when they get there, they soon see that, this is the only way out. I better keep my mouth shut and continue to share.
Okay, let me address the problem on two levels. The first place, I spoke about distributed federalism. The simple idea behind that is that, look, you can't go to gather at a conclave monthly to share. So it's not simply about formula. Now, formula, of course, goes back to the heart of the same issue. Whether you adjust it from 52%, which the federal government currently takes, to probably a far lower threshold, probably like 20.
Yes.
At the heart of it is still this issue of sharing.
Yes.
And I think that's where I believe that we need to get away from. We need to produce. We need to create wealth. That's where we think. That's what we make Nigeria to grow. And creating wealth means investing in infrastructure, in skills. In today's Nigeria, in education, such routine tasks as getting someone to lay your tiles at home, to do a good job of painting, it's a struggle. People come with all manners of things.
And that's what I wanted to ask you, because you're saying now that we have to create wealth. The average person today, the young person who we're hoping will take on agriculture, these people don't want to work. They've seen a system where people don't work and they make it and they are hailed in the society as those who have made it, they've arrived. So why should anyone want to suffer and put his hands in the ground to be wealthy?
Why would you blame them? Yesterday's unemployed fellow who joins politics suddenly become a councillor in a remote village somewhere I won't name now.
Yes.
Now earns something like 150,000 naira for doing nothing. A councillor. And then the next thing you see is that he buys himself one local jalopy of a car.
Yes.
And then begins to lord over the community. Of course, it kills what they call the regard for work.
Yes.
It's so easy. Nigerians are basically, the value system tends to encourage rent. The other day I was somebody was singing this Yoruba song, we want to work small and earn so big. Yes. It's at the heart of our value system, a kind of warped value system where there's very little premium paid to the dignity of labor. Yes. I want to see, for instance, a return to the old practice of, for instance, labor licensing. When we were growing up as children in schools, you came out of secondary school, you went for a trade test.
Yes.
A driver will not get a government job without grade 3 driver's trade test certificate. And then he moves from there to grade 2 and then grade 1. The Tyler needs certification. Now that will encourage him to think that at least he has something to hold on to. But today there's no standardization anywhere. So you are not hold to any standard, no abiding standards, whether at workplace or whatever. So everybody just does as they please. So we need to go back to these fundamentals to build the structures. First, to redress the demands of our youth towards productivity.
Yes.
And to create institutions that actually train people. Because it's one thing to emphasize the skills. It's another thing to provide avenues to acquire those skills. And I see example of some states like Lagos, for instance, doing something in that regard in terms of all their technical schools to retool these children, because that's actually the way to go now.
Now, let's talk about the bailout, because you've had cause to write about that a few times. You said that the recent bailout from the federal government to the state governors, the telltale signs of a looming financial Armageddon. What do you mean by that?
Now, how did we get to a situation of bailout? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. First, something happened. And what happened was that the inflow of resources from the center to the states declined.
This money they normally go to share.
The sharing declined. Yes. And so many of these states that had projected their expenditures on the basis of certain parameters found that they could no longer cope with those parameters. For instance, a state, for instance, whose current budget, salaries, wages, overheads comes to about 2 point something billion. He now goes to Abuja and is given a check for 1 point something billion.
Which means he will never have that.
Exactly. Unfortunately, many of them, they overextended themselves in terms of borrowing. Some of them went and borrowed beyond their capacity because when things were good, and suddenly you had all these crises across the states. And so the federal government wisely thought to avert a looming socio-economic crisis, it was important to step in to help them out of this crisis. They give them the restructure. Many of this they came by way of low restructuring,
Yes.
to at least give them some kind of breathing space. It was not free, by the way.
Yes.
But the idea, at least, is to put some more money to their hands so that they can use it to defray some of this cost. The question is, after this cycle, what happens in the event that there is no improvement in the inflow of resources to those states? Two things are likely to happen. Either they begin to cut the workforce,
Yes.
or, as is currently happening across most of the states now, put a halt to every capital project.
So that's why we're seeing projects not happening across the states.
Across the states. Today, we spend the greater part of our time and we expend the greater part of our energies to discuss salaries and wages
Across the
of
states.
the workforce, yes, of the public service. When we should be thinking of how to open up new roads, how to open up health centers,
Yes.
how to improve the learning environment for our children, and so many other developmental issues that need to be addressed. We are no longer addressing them now. We are talking about how to put money in the hands of
Yes, but you know, you talked about how sensible it was to do that, to give this bailout. And I'm thinking, what could be the option? I mean, the president had just come in, the APC was riding high, some APC states were affected, they couldn't pay salaries as well. And this is a country, whether or not we have everyone's rights and duties stated out clearly in the Constitution, people still look to the president to sort all the problems out. Did you expect the president not to help give out that money to the states?
Honestly, I thought it was the least the president could do in this circumstance. Bailing them out, I like I explained in another forum,
Yes.
makes eminent sense. There's no question about that. My only problem was the design of the package. Because you see, it shouldn't be an incentive for more bad behavior. It shouldn't be a reward for bad behavior or fiscal bad behavior on the part of the states.
Yes.
The federal government ought to have asked each of the states to, in fact, ought to have addressed the situation on a case-by-case basis. Many of these governors who got into trouble got into trouble because they took steps that they ought not to have taken in the first place. For instance, many of them went to jamboree projects,
Yes.
jumbo projects, opening up airports, grandiose schemes that have very little relevance
To the ordinary man on the street.
And so, federal government ought to call them to order. Say, oh, come, how did you get here in the first place? A bit of understanding of how they got there
Yes.
will help them to design
Your package.
for them in such a way as to make it clear to them that this is not a reward for bad behavior. So that next time you come crawling with your bows in hand, you will know that there's a consequence for such behaviors. Look, if it were to be a private sector, that's insolvency. You fold, you close shop. But in this case, some of these governors were simply rewarded. So what stops them next time around? Oh, crisis in the states again, they come converging on Abuja again to ask for another round of package. I think we must probably refine the principle to underscore the need to discourage such bad behaviors in the future. That, I think, is the only missing element I found in the bailout package.
Join us again after the break.
It is difficult to respond to that question.
Angela, that's a great question.
Great question, Angela. Angela, that is a very great question. That's a great question.
Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah, very good question.
That's a good
This
question.
is an interesting question you put.
60 Minutes with Angela. Again, answers to every question you always wanted to ask.
So what is 60 Minutes with Angela all about? It's not an interview. I like to think it's a conversation between two people making the news, people who are in the news, and those who become the news. And the whole idea is to inform, to educate, or to clarify, as the case may be. It is an art getting people to answer the questions that everyone is thinking in their minds. And that's what we try to do on 60 Minutes with Angela. I ask all the questions that everyone's thinking about and no one wants to voice. All the questions you always wanted to ask. You get those answers on 60 Minutes with Angela every week on this station. 60 Minutes with Angela, getting answers to every question you always wanted to ask. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, it's 60 Minutes with me, Angela Ajetomobi. On my hot seat today, Sanya Oni, an editor with Nigeria's Nation newspaper. Now, you wrote about rice too, and it looks like a little bit of confusion, on the policy of rice. The 3 points that you've made. You say, first of all, there was a call for ban on importation of rice by 2018. This was a call made by the frontline governors of rice-producing states, with the vice president and the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, all of them agreeing to ban that importation. The Controller General of the Customs, Colonel Hamid Ali, retired, came out to say no, he was removing immediately rice from the import restriction list.
What happened again?
Yes.
Let me set out what happened really.
Yes.
Present, there's no such thing as ban, because to ban the commodity will have violated WTO principles.
Right.
So there was no ban. What this present administration sought to do actually was to remove the incentives to bring in rice to this country. Now, to have pronounced an outright ban will have run
What
foul.
do you mean remove the
I
incentives?
will explain.
Okay.
To pronounce an outright ban will have violated the principles of the WTO. So what the federal government did was, first, under the immediate past administration, what they did was to ban rice importation through unapproved borders, this time land borders. In other words, you could only bring in rice to the country. It's not banned. Only through the seas,
By ship.
the ports. And there was no ban. If you choose to bring rice into the country,
Yes.
through the approved border, which is the sea, you will be ready to pay duties. Now, because the federal government was actually trying to encourage local production of rice, there's some people that have invested heavily in rice mills. The federal government now said, okay, the federal government determined a quota. Yes, they projected a national demand profile and said, okay, this is the country we produce presently, and this is the gap. Those companies that had shown demonstrable evidence that they had invested in developing a local capacity for rice production, they were given room to bring that small quota into the country. That was the old policy. So they brought in this rice. In fact, they also ran into problem with the federal government because many of them exceeded the quota.
I was going to say that.
Okay.
How we're going to catch
Now,
anyone?
they exceeded the quota because they were giving quota, because those things were checked at the ports.
Yes.
Now, the new administration came in. They suddenly discovered that. Of course, they knew that all along, people were smuggling this rice through the land borders. They couldn't collect the revenue, and yet this rice still found their way into the country. Meanwhile, the people who brought in through their own, they were slammed with 10% duty and 60% levy. In other words, composite 70% on every bag that's brought into the country.
In other words, you were being punished. If you obeyed the law and brought it in by sea, you paid all these taxes.
Yes.
But if you smuggled it in by land, it was practically tax-free.
Exactly. But that was a crime under the law.
Yes.
So I would have imagined that a federal government that is sworn to zero tolerance for bad behavior will focus on the border to ensure that the policies are implemented to the letter. Clamp down on this thing. Find a way to clamp down on these things in the market. Because you see, if there's no demand for the small group product, there will be no supply.
Yes.
But what did the federal government do? They simply threw their hands in the air. Said, okay, because we couldn't stop smuggling at the border, let's open the border again, the land borders now. Let's open the land border. You can now bring it in through the land borders, and then you pay the 10% and the 60% levy. I thought that was a bit defeatist. Yes, it will show up customs revenue, which of course was one of the reasons they gave. But then ultimately, what will be the objective? What will it achieve in terms of the quest towards self-sufficiency in rice production?
Yes.
That's the area of worry I have. To me, I thought the federal government ought to have been more rigorous in their analysis of the challenge. Because you cannot say because you cannot police your border,
Yes.
then you will continue to allow this kind of thing. I don't see how that aligns with the larger objective of trying to
encourage our own production.
And moreover, at the time that these governors were meeting also with the vice president, saying, okay, by 2018,
we'll be self-sufficient.
we should be self-sufficient. At that time, we'll see how we can stop importation of rice. So I think that's the area I have worry. The federal government seems to have done well in terms of, for instance, of this latest policy. If you'll imagine, rice is one of these 41 products, they were under the prohibition list that they don't qualify for. In other words, even if you want to bring the right product now,
You can't
get
Forex
for it. So that's good. But then the same federal government says, okay, open the borders. So you can't be doing one thing
It's
foreign
ironic.
and then using it. You know. So it seems to me a kind of conflict. So
Yes.
that's the point I sought to make it that.
Okay. What about the argument of the rice importers? The argument that imposing retroactive taxes on them, using unorthodox
I say that is
strong arm
that
tactics.
is very disingenuous. My understanding was that during the last administration,
Yes.
when the federal government came up with this policy of giving them concessions, don't forget, it's not a right, it was a concession given to them. That because you had invested in capacity,
Yes.
you had established rice mills, you could bring in a certain quota under what they call the preferential levy. Instead of paying 10% duty and
60%.
60%, you pay 10% duty and 20% levy.
Yes.
That's a preferential only for the quota allotted to you. In other words, the federal government recognizes that there is a shortfall between effective local demand
Yes.
and the capacity to meet that demand. So it was on the basis of that they were allotted that quota. But at the point at which they were given this quota, at the point at which these discussions were going on, they had not determined the quota. So there was a kind of gentleman's agreement. Go and bring your rice. But know that when you bring them in, when we eventually determine your quota,
This is what you will pay.
You will pay preferential duty only for the portion
That is your
represented by
quota.
your quota.
Yes.
Anything over and above that, you will pay
The normal.
the normal.
That's
rate.
the 10% and the 60%.
And the 60%. They agreed. Trust Nigerians. They brought in their consignments. Of course, it exceeded the quota. And the custom simply raised debit notes. And that's where the trouble started. Say no. It is reactive and all manners of things have been thrown into it. But the fact of the matter is that these importers are being simply disingenuous.
Interesting. Okay, but in one breath, you speak of the boundless activism of Goodluck Jonathan's years, in the agricultural sector. But in another breath, you say that governors have not said or done anything different, be it meticulous planning or hard work. Do you think that we can produce enough good rice of international quality to feed over 150 million people?
I'll say yes. What is missing is just the lack of will. We have the land. I don't think anybody will argue that we have problem with lands in this country.
Yes.
Everywhere you go, see
Vast, empty land.
Uncultivated arable lands. We are lucky. We have good soils in this country. So what's the missing point? The missing element is the will to drive the process through. Whatever you may say of that boundless activism of the previous government, there was at least an awareness that there's something we can do about this problem. Obasanjo started it, don't forget. Obasanjo started the presidential initiative on rice. And he took it up to a point, and then the Jonathan administration came and also took it up from there.
Yes.
Now, what exactly is the problem with the rice here? I don't think the problem is production really. Our key problem is processing. The local rice,
Yes.
we do not have the technology to process rice to such quality
As we see.
as to qualify for our tables. You see, stoning and whatever things.
Yes.
So the technology is there in the marketplace. It's something that can be invested in. And I think that's where the last administration did a lot of. The policy was actually to encourage these people. And
Yes.
there is a lot of evidence to show that a lot of grounds have been covered. I believe that what this administration needs to do is to drive this process to its logical conclusion. If there are shortfalls, there are gaps, push it. After all, the people selling this rice to us, whether from Thailand or whatever, they didn't arrive to the point in which they are exporting this overnight.
Yes.
It took consistency in government policies to be able to arrive at this point. I think we can push it. Particularly now that our inflow of foreign exchange is declining. Even if not for nothing else, the fact that we can no longer afford the luxury of throwing our foreign exchange on all manners of things should compel us to think on how we can, if only to reduce the demand for foreign rice. And by the way, the local rice, which they call ofada,
Yes.
is becoming more of an elite thing now.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very expensive now.
That tells you that Nigerians actually know that there's a lot of value in that local rice.
Yes.
So why can't we encourage it then?
I also wanted your comment on this 1.4 trillion naira fine from Nigeria's Communication Commission to MTN on what they call allegations of SIM infractions. People are saying it seems hostile, that punishment. Then wouldn't encourage investors who want to come in. What do you think about that?
Now, when I had a figure 1 point something trillion,
Yes.
my gut instinct was like, this is punitive. And the first thing I tried to seek was to understand the basis of the fine. And I did a quick check. I discovered that it was premised on the fact that it was calculated on the basis of 200,000 naira per SIM card infraction.
In other words, for every SIM not registered, the fine.
The fine, yeah, 200,000 naira. So, to that extent, it's not arbitrary. So if we agree that it's not arbitrary, it means there's a basis for that figure. The second issue is, were they in violation of this thing? That's where we can debate that. If they are, then look, deep water in America.
Yes.
When there was this oil spill, remember the story?
Yes.
Even before the matter went to court, President Obama was all over the place.
Yes.
Say, I'm going to look for a boat to kick. Look, so we are talking about a serious national security issue. The issue of SIM card restriction didn't start yesterday.
Yes.
It started several years back. It was an industry thing. The federal government, the NCC, mandated all of them to register every SIM card.
Why do you think they don't want to register these SIM cards?
That is the question that even some of us are still trying to find answers to. Why will you sell an unregistered SIM card after when you know the position of the law on it? I am not saying that MTN is in violation, but the question is, if NCC is saying you sold those ones, then the onus is on MTN to tell Nigerians that
we did not.
They haven't said that. The best they have said was that they were in discussion with the regulators.
Will it amount to the same crime if it's pre-registered? In other words, sometimes some people go and buy bulk SIMs and pre-register them and try to sell it. If you are not smart, you would have bought a SIM that's already registered to somebody and they say, oh, don't worry, it's already registered.
Whose responsibility is it?
To make sure it's registered to you.
Is it vendor?
Yes.
So you ultimately, it lies with you to ensure that every SIM card that leaves your premises, even if you give it to your agents, you still have a responsibility to ensure that when they're bringing in their returns, all of them are registered. That's the law. And I want us to see things this way.
Yes.
Part of the problem we have in this country is the weakness of our institutions. Institutions that are meant to enforce the law.
They're kind of selective.
Not selective. Sometimes they are too weak. Many of them, you break the law and then you think that you can get away with it because the institutions will not do things, the way you expected. And sometimes they are proven wrong. And when it comes with the kind of regulated hammers we have seen in the case of this one, the whole world are shouting, ha, ha, ha. But elsewhere, you can't get away with it. In some developed countries of the world, I don't think you'll get away with it.
Join us again after the break.
It is difficult to respond to that question.
Angela, that's a great question.
Great question, Angela. Angela, that is a very great question. That's a great question.
Okay, that's a great question.
Yeah, very good question.
That's a good question.
This is an interesting question you put.
60 Minutes with Angela. Again, answers to every question you always wanted to ask.
So what is 60 Minutes with Angela all about? It's not an interview. I like to think it's a conversation between two people making the news, people who are in the news, and those who become the news. And the whole idea is to inform, to educate, or to clarify, as the case may be. It is an art getting people to answer the questions that everyone is thinking in their minds. And that's what we try to do on 60 Minutes with Angela. I ask all the questions that everyone's thinking about and no one wants to voice. All the questions you always wanted to ask, you get those answers on 60 Minutes with Angela. Every week on this station, 60 Minutes with Angela, getting answers to every question you always wanted to ask. Welcome back. My concluding moments now with Sanya Oni, an editor with Nigeria's Nation newspapers. I said earlier that you threw shade at the president. You said his understanding and judgment of the complexities of our current time. You're calling it to question. I'll tell you the issues you've raised. You said you talked about new wine in old wine skins. Your first point, same old faces that have dominated the space in the last 16 years. You talked about the average age of his cabinet nominees. You said it's 61. You mentioned 3 people, Kachiku Ube, Chris Ngige, and Babatunde Fashola. And you said, how can the brilliance or pedigree of these 3, for example, square with the gut instinct of a team leader stuck to ancient paradigms? Are you saying the president is not modern enough, or is still operating as an ancient president?
That's not what I tried to say in that piece, on that reference. With due respect to the president, he means well, and some of the issues have come into public, into the fore in public discourse. The president, he seems to have the common touch.
Yes.
But it takes more than common touch to run a complex economy, a complex society like Nigeria. I'll start with a simple illustration.
Yes.
Ibe Kachiku, when he came on board, one of the things he told us was that all these refineries, by December, they'll be working. And then as a kind of midterm report, I think he went around and he discovered that the prospects of their returning to any optimal levels is very, very slim. And so he made that comment. He said, look, if I were to advise the president, I would just sell all these refineries. But then the president has never hidden the fact that he wants those refineries to continue to operate as public entities. Secondly, the issue of subsidy came up. The president, there's no subsidy. I have a problem with that. That kind of blanket dismissal, there's no public subsidy. Because it's so easy to check.
Yes.
What is the current rate? You can just Google PLAB, which is a plat. The reference price for all these products.
Yes.
You can determine their price online.
They are all there.
And then by the time you look at the cost, the landing cost, there's a differential. Who bears this differential? Where does the funds for paying off this differential, where does it come from? From the public till. My argument is that we have reached a point where government does not need to subsidize my consumption of petrol. My grandmother in the village does not use petrol.
Because not everybody uses petrol.
That's the thing. If I use 10 liters of petrol daily and government pays a differential of 2 naira on every liter, my grandmother in the village doesn't use any, does not enjoy that differential. I can agree with all the arguments about, it will bring down, if you remove the subsidy, it will drive down the cost of things. But the fact of the matter is that who are the people enjoying the thing is what I call regressive taxation. And so when you have a president that has that instinct that, look, no, let's leave it.
Yes, but is it wrong, Mr. Oni, for the president to want these things to remain as public entities?
It's not wrong.
To serve the larger good of larger group of Nigerians.
You see, good intentions.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with good intentions. But you see, good intentions have to be married with practical politics. This man was our oil minister in the 70s. The conditions that existed then in the 70s no longer operate now. Then we weren't paying subsidies. Let me also tell you the story of subsidy. People think that Nigeria, that subsidy that has always been there. No! There was a time in this country where there were differential prices for products.
Fuel, yes. You went to Texaco, you went to different places. Prices. They all had different
This
prices.
thing came about and again, the issue of the refineries. The first refinery in this country was not built by the government. It was built by Shell. So, government took them over. So, if you look back, we'll go back to history, you'll find that it's not as if people are asking that, let private sector take over. It's not as if they're saying anything new, really. What we are saying is that our experience with these firms,
yes,
public entities, they have not been very good. Sincerely speaking, I wish we could come up with a model. And I always say it,
yes,
that our problem really, the problem really is not so much whether it's in government hand or not, but how to develop what you call a working template that will serve our national objectives.
Outstay everybody else.
A country like Singapore, which I visited, they have refineries and it's in government hands. But the work ethic in Singapore is different from Nigeria's work ethic. So why don't we look for something that works for us? I don't care if a Dangote owns a refinery. All I'm interested in is
fuel is available.
It's petrol at the pump. Yeah. So if we can get private investors to come on board. Now, government does not have money now. Government is looking for money to build schools, to build hospitals, to fix our roads. The same government will now be looking for money again to build a refinery. A business, something that the private sector can better do. That's my problem. And when you look at this thing, you say you want to bring the private sector on board. You will never be able to bring the private sector on board if you do not eliminate the subsidy. The reason is simple. If I was going to be a financier, you walk up to me and say, okay, I'll ask for cash flow.
Yes.
And then I look at it. You say, what exactly is the regulatory framework? Mm-hmm. And then you say, when I finish my production, I will sell it at so and so price and expect. The man will say, stop there.
And then the government will give me
Government will
back
give me back my money.
money.
Just stop there.
That's not business.
That's not business. So we need to throw out these things so that, just like people imagine that oil is something that is some kind of special product.
Yes.
Oil is just like any other product. Groundnut, you buy it. They're just you can't put your groundnut in the market and say some government will tell you the price of to sell.
It seems like a very elitist business.
That's the problem. We, and because we have a class that has fed on the rent system.
Yes.
We have more or less glamorized oil. We say it's the live wire of economy and things like that. Look, the bottom line is a regime that has failed. Only a foolish man will keep doing the same things and expect
a different result.
We've tried government ownership. I'm not saying the private sector is necessarily the model of excellence. We've seen so many infractions. But governments over the years have done far better in regulating than being involved in actual operations.
Yes.
So I want to see the government through the system, through the environment open, that's liberalization,
Yes.
and then regulate.
And I can't let you go without talking about some politics. I haven't heard your comment overall on the selection of nominees for the president's cabinet. We've seen the president's list. We've seen them undergo screening.
Yeah.
What are your comments generally?
Like every Nigerian, I have certain expectations. When we're waiting, I expected a far more youthful cabinet.
Isn't this youthful enough? It's a slow journey
Yeah.
to get there, Mr. Oni. You and I know, those of us who still have parents, know how difficult it can be for that age to relinquish authority.
I'm not saying we should retire our senior men.
Yes.
That's not what I'm saying. But then a cabinet largely dominated by 50, 60-year-olds in a nation where 50% of the population are probably below 40.
Yes.
That says a lot. In any case, Buhari himself came on the scene when he was in his 40s. Most of these people came in when they were in their mid-40s and 30s.
Yes.
And so
We're stuck with it.
we're stuck. Are we saying that we can't go beyond the same cycle that we've seen? What's going to happen to that generation? We'll have to wait until they are 50s and 60s before they come also. That's my problem. That's the point number one. But honestly, it's not so much about competence, but I'm saying that we need to develop a new generation of leaders who can take over. And these are smart kids. Go and see 30, 35, 30 something year olds. They are doing wonders in business. So why can't you not bring them into politics? If they could do so well in the private sector, why can't they?
For themselves.
Why can't you now begin to inject more of them into governance? That's my problem. That's my position.
Okay. Now the River State Governorship Election Petition Tribunal, that decision, Governor Wike, you heard his address. He raised the pertinent issue that the case in River State was on all fours with that of Lagos State. In one case, the tribunal says card readers are not important. In another case, the tribunal says it goes to the substance of the election.
I'm not a lawyer, and I've had a few of the comments made by politicians. My primary comment would be that they should allow the system to run. Okay, whatever objections you have, the courts are still there to resolve them ultimately. Disparaging the integrity of the courts, casting aspersion on, will help no one. Ultimately, if the courts have ruled, let's wait. And the man has indicated his intention to appeal the case. So why run down the courts? Just get your lawyers to do the job and we'll wait.
Are we to let it ride? The chairman of the National Human Rights Commission, Chidi Odinkalu, says that electoral fraud doesn't just happen, that ordering a rerun is not enough. We must hold someone accountable. So
I think that's part of the problem. Or I would have expected, even while these cases were running, some of these cases, some of these established infractions, particularly those ones that are border on commission of crimes, ought to be in court to run pari passu. Look, if people broke the law, people killed in the course of an election and something because they want to get into office, if they were answering to the judiciary on very serious or weighty issues of crime, you see, the other one will be easy to dispose of. That's why people can commit crimes and say, don't worry, because there's nothing that's going on there. You will imagine, for instance, the Rivers election where so many people died.
Yes.
There's some people will be standing trial for
There's
the crime.
no trial going on.
Nobody.
I mean, the Human Rights Commission recommended, I remember in May 2015, 117 persons for prosecution. Till today, I don't
Not
think one has been charged.
Not one. Not one. And yet, we're still talking about the people. That's why people can sit down and talk about, cast aspersion on judges
Yes.
for daring to expose whatever went wrong.
And the crisis in the National Assembly. Now that the House of Representatives Speaker, Yakubu Dogara, has constituted his committees, 96 of them, the House Leader, Femi Gbajabiamila, says that in constituting those committees, the Speaker did not consult him. The Speaker replies saying he did not act unilaterally. The question is, does anyone expect the two of them to work reasonably well together, considering that they were rivals going into the speakership election?
I don't think anybody will be surprised about the turnout of things.
Yes.
We saw it in the build-up, and then what the party sought to do was to bring the two factions together. Now, what you are seeing is actually an extension of those things that started from, I will expect a Dogara, for instance, who was forced to swallow the humble pie. Of course, he still has the power to do certain things in a way that will probably please his own interest, that will favor his interest. I mean, it's to be expected.
Yes.
And the other party who also feels that they have lost out in the arrangement will also complain. The point I tried to make was that there's no, it shouldn't surprise anyone that this thing is playing out again. What it shows is how far the party has to go to reconcile the various parties, the various interests in the party, until the party is able to actually sit down to forge. The party. If you look at the background of the coming together of APC,
yes,
so many interests came to play. They came together with the sole objective of getting rid of the.
Are you one of those who still thinks that the APC doesn't have one soul yet?
Oh, it should be obvious by now.
Yes.
Look at the crisis, whether you are talking of the Senate, even look at the constitution of even the federal cabinet itself shows a lot of tendency, a lot of complaints here and there.
Yes.
Some people, some governors even complain that they were not consulted and all the things like that.
Yes.
So I think it has to do more with the way the party came together. And I think with time the party ought to be able to grow out of it. Yes. What's happening there is just a kind of more or less like a mini play of the larger dynamics actually operating within the party. So I think it's something that will eventually pan out.
You think the APC will survive all this?
Oh, sure.
There have been talks about some people leaving the APC to form a new party. You don't think the APC will be decimated at all before 2019?
Let me answer it this way.
Yes.
If ever there was a party that was more mechanical, I think PDP was. PDP was a contraption put together by some elements in Nigeria in the political system.
Yes.
Dominant actors, they came together. It became a very huge electoral machine, vote catching machine, and they survived. APC is not different in any substantial way. Ultimately, because it's a party at the center with plenty of patronage to dispense, you will see people will fall into line, fall in line. That's the way it goes.
Always a pleasure speaking with you, Mr. Oni. Thank you very much for coming on the program today.
It's always my pleasure.
And thank you for watching. I'm Angela Ajetomobi.